Welcome to another episode of Otherworldly Encounters with Mike and Brian. How you doing, bud?
Doing good, man. How about yourself?
No complaints, no complaints. How's your Sunday been?
Sunday's been a lazy day today. Friday, we celebrated a friend's birthday, went out for some Italian. Saturday, I played golf in the morning. Ohio weather right now, you're like mid-90s, 100% humidity, and it's just brutally hot. So I had to have several adult beverages to keep me hydrated while I golfed. That worked well in the front, not so much on the back. But all in all, it's been a good weekend. It's good guys in Columbus. So if you like cars, it's a big weekend.
Yeah. No, I played some golf, shot one of my best 9-hole rounds of a 38, and then 2 days later shot a 80 or a 90 on 18. But there was no liquor, no beers, nothing involved, and I think that's probably half the problem.
There you go.
All right. So this episode, we got a good one for you. We've got former Naval Flight Officer Sean with us today. Sean, how are you?
I'm good, guys. How are you?
Pretty good. So this episode, like we've told our listeners what we promised, this is going to kind of recap Graves and Grush and Fravor, kind of like they're talking more about the technologies that the U.S. military has. Again, we're not looking to divulge any type of national secrets or anything like that. But Sean hopefully will be able to answer our questions. And if he can't, he's just going to tell us he can't. So Sean, would you like to give us a little bio about you?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Well, and also first, I'd just like to apologize again for the scheduling snafus. So appreciate your patience and for still inviting me to participate in the show. Looking forward to it. I've listened to your other episodes and they're terrific.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. So I graduated from college in 2000, was a history major, then worked for about a year, as a history major. Obviously, what do? You go work for a software development company, right? And then was kind of rethinking what I wanted to do. I had thought about joining the military before I went to college. And was probably about 50% of my mind made up. That's what I wanted to do. And then following 9/11, that kind of cemented things for me. So I'd always been partial to the Navy. So I got in touch with the Navy recruiter and submitted an application for officer candidate school and got picked up for flight officer. So in the Navy, you have naval aviators. Those are the pilots. And then you have naval flight officers. Those are the NFOs or backseaters. So I like to say I was Goose, not Maverick, right? And yeah, so in August of 2002, I reported for officer candidate school in Pensacola, Florida, graduated in early November, and then started kind of the aviation training pipeline in January or February in Pensacola.
So for a flight officer, do you guys record like how many flight hours you guys have, just like a pilot would?
Yeah. Yep. So we keep a flight log. So I have, all of my flights, starting with my training flights and all the way through my kind of operational and training assignments. So yeah, I've got my flight log.
So how many hours of flight time do you have?
Total, I've got 1,900 hours.
Nice.
That's quite a bit.
It is quite a bit. All right. So before we go any further, we have like the most important thing to do of the thing is discuss what our weapons of choice is for this podcast. Do you want me to go first, Brian?
Well, we're drinking. I think we are drinking the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so we got this. So if our listeners remember Tyler from our second episode,
the Travis Walton
episode, he sent us this beer. It's from a local brewery in Pennsylvania,
New Trail Brewing Company, and the beer is called Lawn Games Hazy IPA.
Yeah, and it's got a guy
throwing cornhole in the front,
playing cornhole in it.
Love it.
So, Sean, what are you drinking?
Outstanding. So. A little bit more tame this evening. I've just got an Arnold Palmer, not even a John Daly. So, I've got a big week at work the next couple of days. So just going with an Arnold Palmer this evening.
All right. Well, it's respectable.
Mike, we really need to work on the sound effects for the womp womp there.
Yeah, I know. I can't remember what the button is. If once I get that button locked down, we're gonna have Sean on and we're asking him again. I'm using it on him.
Right.
So All right. So
1,900 hours.
Yeah.
That's a lot, man.
Yeah, quite a bit of time. So yes, starting in flight school, I mean, basically you start off even as a flight officer, your first, several months, you're going through the same training as pilots. And you get some initial flights where you have the stick, you have the controls. And then you kind of start, as you get through different phases of flight training, you start getting, narrowing down and identifying the specific type of plane you're going to ultimately fly. So I got through primary and then intermediate, and then I decided to fly on a plane called the EP3, which is a surveillance and reconnaissance platform in the Navy. And those missions tend to be longer missions, right? We'd be up for 8 to 10 hours.
Wow.
So, it's relatively easy to accumulate a good amount of flight hours.
Now what, Sean, and I have no idea what that is. Can you describe for us what kind of plane are we talking for an EP3? Obviously it's got to be a bigger craft if it's 8 to 10 hours up.
Yeah. So if you know the NOAA's Hurricane Hunters, it's a 4-engine turboprop with a 24-man crew. So it's a non-carrier based plane.
Okay.
So when you were, would you say what was your primary job as a flight officer? Was it mainly like all the systems and the technology part that you have inside the EP3?
Yeah. I mean, so there were a few NFOs on each crew. And you would kind of graduate up in terms of your roles and responsibilities.
Sean, what does NFO? What does NFO mean?
Sorry, it stands for Naval Flight Officer.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yep. So some of them might just be handling, helping the flight station out with communications and navigation, and then you graduate up into kind of more of the, helping run and oversee the mission.
You've listened to our Fravor and Graves and Rush episode. What are your initial thoughts on their stories, or their, what they encountered or experienced?
Yeah. So, listen to the podcasts and then also definitely done some reading on them. And first and foremost, right, I don't want to, who am I to, question any of their testimony and anything they saw. So, it's interesting for sure. I myself never had any similar encounters. So, it's hard for me to, put myself in their shoes, given what they saw and what they experienced. But it's definitely interesting.
So, Sean, what do you think, being someone that's flown and that's been involved, I always think credentials are important. And I'm curious what you think about Graves and Fravor. And just as kind of reminder for you and then for our viewers, Fravor was a 24 years of service, 18 as a pilot, 4,000 hours logged flight time, 5 tours to the Persian Gulf, commanding officer of VA-41, the Black Aces, and attended Top Gun. And then Graves, 11 years in the Navy flying F-18s, two deployments, and part of VFA-11, the F-A-18 Super Hornet Squadron. So what do you think, just in terms of credibility from those guys' backgrounds, before we even get into the story?
Sure. I mean, impressive bios, right? Impressive resumes for both of them, especially, Fravor, the commanding officer of the Black Aces, right? Not everybody makes the commanding officer by any stretch of the imagination. So, yeah, I mean, on the surface, both impressive resumes, and would seem to have quite a bit of credibility.
Getting into their stories, and, obviously they had noticed some UAPs on their radar itself, or the Nimitz, the ship initially saw that but obviously they picked it up on their plane's radars. Can you walk us through and maybe help us understand, like, how do those radars work? How can you differentiate like friend from foe? Does it actually tell you like this is say a Chinese aircraft, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, so great questions. Thinking about Fravor first. So they took off, and if I remember correctly, they were kind of receiving guidance from the USS Princeton, which is a guided missile cruiser. And I think it was the Princeton who said, their training mission was going to be suspended, and they were going to be doing a real world mission to go out and take a look at these objects that have been observed over the past couple of weeks, right? Going from 80,000 feet rapidly down to 20,000 feet, hovering for a couple of hours, and then, going back up. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So, so you've got the radars on the ships, and you've got the radars that are on the aircraft. And it sounds like at this point, they were going off of the radar returns from the Princeton, and not necessarily off their own organic systems on board on the Hornets. Basically, radars, they're throwing electrons out there. Those electrons are bouncing off things, and then they're interpreting the results and the returns, right? So oftentimes, just like with civil aviation, planes will squawk a specific code, right, which helps the radars that are tracking them know who they are. If it's a civil aircraft, if it's a commercial airliner, if it's a military aircraft. So oftentimes there are ways that planes can identify themselves, but if they're not squawking or kind of proactively identifying themselves, then just, the radar is letting you know that, hey, there's a hunk of metal out there. And yeah, depending on the capabilities of the radar, it'll, tell you how far out it is, what bearing it's at, what altitude it's at, and potentially the size of it. But again, that's going to depend on kind of the capability of the specific radar system that's being used.
And Sean, I think it's interesting, since we're talking about Fravor first, and I don't know geographically where you typically flew, but I know part of what was interesting with Fravor's story is it was west of San Diego, perfect San Diego day, clear blue sky, no white caps in the ocean. So I feel like from even leaving radar behind from just a pure visibility standpoint, I have to imagine that's about ideal conditions.
Yeah, it sounds like it for sure, right? Great, what they call like VMC, visual meteorological conditions. Yeah, it sounds like a beautiful day.
So just real quick on that. So on a beautiful day, like Brian just described, just out from your naked eye, like how far can you see when you're up in the sky flying around?
Great question. I mean, you can see a ways.
Okay.
However, that being said, and I know that's not really a very specific answer, aircraft and other airborne objects look, they look pretty small pretty quickly. So even when something's a mile away, it's looking pretty small. Even when it's, half a mile away, it's still looking pretty small.
Okay, so these objects must have been pretty big that Fravor was seeing, because they were within a half mile, and they were saying they were fairly big, right?
And Fravor described the Tic Tac as he kind of guesstimated it to be 40 feet long.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
Yeah.
And I think what also caught his eye was the larger, like, submerged object, right? Throwing up the whitewater.
Yeah. So walk us through. I mean, it's interesting. We've talked about radar, in-air radar, but what about subsurface, under the ocean radar? Radar can't penetrate into the ocean, correct? It's only in the air?
Yeah. So then you start talking about sonar, right? Which is basically the the underwater version of radar.
Mm-hmm.
And sonar basically works the same way as radar. It throws out waves and it bounces back.
Yeah, so you're just dealing with like sound waves instead of electromagnetic waves.
And so I'm assuming if we had a ship or a sub in that area, it would have been able to detect that large of a object just below the surface of the ocean.
Potentially, right? I'm not I'm not a radar expert, and B, I'm definitely not a sonar expert. But if we had a sonar equipped ship or a submarine that was operating in that area, in theory, yeah, probably would have been able to see it.
Okay.
So when you watched the Fravor video, right? The UAP he caught on their equipment.
Yeah, and it wasn't him, right? It was the crew that flew after him.
Correct.
Right. So what are your thoughts on that video? Like, what do you see? Do you think it's like a extraterrestrial? Do you think it's some CIA vehicle? Like, what are your thoughts?
It's tough to say, and I'm like, I don't want to give. I hate to give a non-answer, but and also remind me, was his video, was that FLIR or was it a radar image?
Well, so that's a trick question because really it's both, right? So there was the situational awareness screen, which we don't have any photo or video from, but then the actual video that was released was the FLIR video showing the tic tac. I think it was going right to left on the screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. So yeah, FLIR is a totally different technology than radar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, but back to your question in terms of what it is or what it was, again, like having not been there first person, it's tough to say, it really is.
Well, what were your thoughts when you watched it? Like, what was your initial reaction when you watched the video?
Yeah, that's doing some funky stuff.
Right.
And, to say exactly what it was, hey, who knows?
Sean, let me ask you this. This was the part that I thought was really interesting with the Fravor video specifically. So they were west of their combat air patrol area. They were, and specifically looking at my notes, they were 40 miles south of the ship. He runs into this thing. The UFO disappears, goes to the cap point, which is 60 miles away in a 30-second span, which doing the math puts it at 3,600 miles per hour. Now, credit to one of the listeners who had said, well, you're assuming it's the same craft and not another one, which fair point. We don't know that it wasn't just one, but assuming that was that actual craft that moved, 3,600 miles is a lot faster than anything we have, correct? That we know of?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's moving. If it is the same craft, like that's moving. Certainly faster than any plane I flew on.
So what would you do in that situation? I mean, you've got your coordinates locked in or your flight path, your waypoints. Obviously everything I would assume is encrypted. But you leave an area where you just saw, UAP, and then so you're heading to your next waypoint, and said UAP is just sitting there. I mean, what do you do at that point? Like, what are your rules of engagement? What are the protocols?
And I think before you even answer that, Sean, that's a great question, Mike, and I want to interject because we talked about this was important, and we didn't know what the reaction was. There was active radar jamming against Fravor, and that was prior to the UAP moving to the cap point. So I think it is a good question. Like, what is protocol? Like, how do you handle that? How are you supposed to handle a situation like that?
I mean, if you are, if all of a sudden you're being actively jammed, I mean, I think you are, relaying that information back to,
the Princeton.
To the Princeton, to the, to the strike group, to the Nimitz, and just saying like, hey, this is what's going on. What do you want me to do?
So for our listeners, just so they understand, the plane that you flew in, Sean, yours was completely unarmed, right? It was just a recon. You're taking in information, correct?
Yeah. I mean, the plane I was on was a reconnaissance plane.
Mm-hmm. So your roles of engagement could potentially be different than an armed aircraft. Is, I guess, the point where I'm trying to get to.
I mean, just in general, right? Even if you encounter a situation, I would imagine, where you're experiencing, like, active jamming. Again, I think you're going to relay that back to the Princeton, to the Nimitz, to whoever, and kind of ask for additional guidance, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to, obviously your spidey sense is probably going to go up quite a bit. And you're going to be looking for other potential risk indicators, but you're going to be kind of, again, relaying that information back and then seeking additional guidance.
That's fair. Is that a fairly common thing to have happen?
I never encountered that.
Right. Okay. I'm just curious. I wouldn't imagine it's very often, but I have no idea.
Yeah. I don't think it is.
Brian, correct me if I'm wrong. I think when we were first talking about this, they were out when they're doing these like 1v1 type scenarios, right? Mm-hmm. They're unarmed, right? They don't have any type of munitions on them whatsoever.
Yep.
But they were then sent to check out.
And Fravor even said like he expects it to be some kind of drug running scenario because they're off the west coast of San Diego. They're like, well, somebody's smuggling something. We'll just go chase them off.
Yeah, that's fair. So is there an established reporting process for pilots or for flight officers if they do encounter a UAP, UFO?
I mean, when I was flying, I was not aware of one. That's not to say that one didn't exist. I think had we experienced something, then yeah, sure, we would have gotten back and, asked, okay, hey, this is what we saw. Again, from doing a little bit of research over the past week or so, it seems like there's now a much more kind of centralized way of reporting, these types of sightings and incidents. And that, I think that was one of the big initiatives from Graves. Right. For kind of establishing
transparency,
more of it. Yeah, transparency and more of a centralized database.
Sean, what's your thought? I thought the timing too, when we're talking about Fravor, so again, we're talking 2004 is the incident. Do you think it's weird, or do you think that sounds about right, that no one came to talk to Fravor until 5 years later in 2009, and that was Jay Stratton?
Again, it's tough to say. I don't know. I don't know what happened with the FLIR information once it was submitted, mm-hmm. right? Or the report, or where the report went. So the fact that no one came to talk to him for 5 years, it's tough to say.
I mean, could have it been that, that when that incident happened and they reported it back to the powers to be on the ship, that they didn't think it was relevant to send up the chain of command? Or do you think it just they did send it up and then the government was just like, I don't feel that there's a need to investigate right now?
Again, like I to put myself in the position of like the CEO of the carrier, the strike group lead, commander, who knows? It could have just gotten lost, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it was intentional and part of some larger conspiracy, or if it was just, hey, 2004, there was a lot going on. And yeah, so, what contributed to that delay, I'm not sure.
So is it like kind of taboo for a pilot or flight officer to report that they were out and they actually saw something they couldn't explain? Did you ever encounter anyone in your squadron that ever reported that or seen something that they just couldn't, understand?
A story over a drink or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think so. Again, I don't remember in my squadron anyone having any stories, encountering a UAP. But that being said, the culture was such where if someone had, I don't think it would have been taboo to report it. We had I think the aviation community in general, especially the military and the naval aviation community, is pretty tight knit, right? There's a lot of camaraderie. It'll change from squadron to squadron, but for the most part, really tight knit culture. And so I don't think, I can't imagine if anyone had seen anything, that it would have been, you would have been laughed at for saying it, for reporting anything.
Well, do you remember Fravor was saying after they got back and the other crew that actually filmed the Tic Tac got back, for the next week on the carrier, it was just like a constant loop of Independence Day, Men in Black, like every alien movie known to man. So I think there was a lot of jokes. Some kind of carrier cartoon went out poking fun at him.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to like people might give you, I don't know, good natured, ribbing, but like nothing really severe.
Let's flip over, unless Sean, you have something else for Fravor. I'd like to talk about Graves for a little bit too.
Yeah, sure.
I guess before we do that, like, what is your final verdict on the Fravor case? Just a total unknown? You think it's extraterrestrial? You think that's us and some kind of black project? What's kind of your presumption based on all the story and the evidence that's been presented?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, yes. Again, I think having not been there myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for me to say.
Yeah. That's fair.
It really is. I think you can, as we've learned over the past couple of years, right? As all of a sudden discovered balloons floating across the United States, right? Also, I was reading an article talking about the huge increase in the number of Starlink satellites, right? And I know this was operating obviously much differently in a much different kind of area. But I think just having not been there to see it myself, I'm reluctant to say one way or the other.
That's fair. I got a lot of feedback. Last week, we talked to our friend Sean about his UFO encounter and talked about the photo that he took. And I got a lot of people asking whether we thought that was a Starlink satellite series moving across the sky. So, yeah, I get it. There's a lot up there. Okay. Well, anyway, let's flip over to Graves. And I'm curious to ask you about this. And I remember when we did this was episode 4, when we did this, and Mike had mentioned to you, and I just thought it was so fascinating because Graves had said, so they're doing workups in 2014. They're off the East Coast of the U.S. Didn't really see anything until they upgraded their radars to APG-79. Now, that means absolutely nothing to me, but hopefully in the Navy pilot community, that means something. What's your take on that upgrade, or can you kind of talk to what you may or may not know about it, or what that may have presented them that they didn't previously have?
Sure. Yeah, I can do my best. So the APG-79 was a significant upgrade over the F-18's original radar, which I believe was the APG-73. Which was an upgrade of the APG-65. And one of the big differences is that the 79 is what's called an AESA radar, AESA, which is, I'm going to probably butcher this, but a active electronically scanned array. So it's like a quantum leap in terms of improved capability. So yeah, it's not surprising that all of a sudden with the APG-79, they're able to see, further out, they're able to see more objects. It's just a much more capable radar.
Probably. What about resolution? I know both pilots had talked about, and I forget the term, and I don't know, Mike, maybe you remember, where the dots basically merge into one on the radar and you can't really separate you from somebody else, at least from the ship.
Merge plot.
Merge plot.
I was
yeah.
going to say plot.
When they hit a merge plot, like does the definition of the radar increase too? Which meaning like, can they see more planes in a smaller footprint?
Potentially, yes. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, basically, so ACE, again, I'm going to hopefully I got it right, but it's an active electronically scanned array radar. And one of the big differences with this type of radar is, I mean, basic radar operation, like you have to have it has to be able to transmit, it has to be able to receive, and then it has to be able to kind of digest and interpret the information that came back, right? Mm-hmm. So with an ASA radar, you have tons of different, basically mini transmit receive nodes that can be independently controlled by a computer. So it's almost, I mean, in some ways you can think about it almost like LED technology, right? And so the more, independent transmit receive nodes you have, the more resolution you're going to get on what's out there.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
No, that does. It makes perfect sense. And I appreciate the background information there. And I guess to take that just one step further and without delving into any kind of classified information, can you talk to some of the advanced technologies that reconnaissance pilots have outside of that they may use to identify craft? So,
I mean, again, what you're going off of, or what is, hey, is the object out there squawking, right? Mm-hmm. So is it actively saying, hey, this is who I am, right? And that can be either generic commercial airliner or military aircraft, down to kind of, hey, this specific airliner, right? I mean, you've probably all looked at like Flight Aware or Flight View, right? There's like that flight tracking software where you can
love it.
Yeah, where you can see the specific tail number, right, of a plane, where it is, what altitude it's at.
I'm that dude that's having the fire in his backyard, drinking some beers, and I've got that thing pulled up, and I'm like, oh, that flight's going from Columbus to Dallas. It's flight blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, I pulled it up to look at all the places I would love to go to.
Right.
And kind of wish I was on that plane. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Beam me up.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
So, yeah, I mean, so, plane, like, military aircraft will squawk as well, right? So that's one of the main ways that who's out there. And then, if you're out there flying and based on the radar returns you're getting, you can have some sort of idea of what other ships are out there, or you have an idea as well of, if you're flying with other aircraft, of where they're located. So yeah, I mean, it's one of the, you're also kind of relying on other inputs as well to, positively identify aircraft, or, if there are aircraft coming in where you don't know where their origin is, and they're not, positively identifying themselves. Mm-hmm. That's a situation where it's like, okay, well, hey, we're going to take some more steps to try and positively identify who they are and what their intentions are.
And so you watched the Graves video, right? Where the his I guess he would be his like weapons officer, right? Who's and he was able to actually lock on to that UAP, and it followed it.
The gimbal, there's the gimbal and the go fast. Yeah.
But that's the same, right? It's two
separate videos, but
Graves. But okay. But I know that you've said that you weren't there. It's hard for you to say, but I mean, you obviously have your own personal opinion. Like when you watch this video, like what are your thoughts? I mean, we're not here to, obviously bash anybody, but like, what are your thoughts when you initially saw that? Did it look like it's something like American made, or maybe one of our adversaries, or do you think it's one of those? It is a UAP. Like I don't know where it would have came from.
I thought, hey, that thing's moving fast. Basically.
Like how fast do you think that thing was moving in your experience? Like, it was obviously, if you think of a clock going from, if you're looking at the screen, maybe from like 1 o'clock to like, I don't know, 7 o'clock type thing. Like how fast do you, just looking at the video, obviously we're not holding you to this, is just like a guesstimation. How fast do you think that thing was moving?
Oh man.
And I know it's hard to like really put a number to it, but I mean, to me that thing was, and I don't know really like the true mile per hour of a plane, like a military plane would fly. Like so let's talk about like the EP3. How fast, what was your top speed with that plane?
Oh, we were slow. I would say our true airspeed was around 330 knots.
And then so for like an F-16, F-18, what would their, like you probably, I'm sure they have like a cruising speed and then they have like max speed. What would be their cruising speed? If you know?
I mean, I don't know, frankly. I really don't. I mean, I think they could, cruise at that, but they could also, they probably cruise quite a bit faster.
I think I remember I was looking through my notes and I don't see it, but I want to say that I think it was Graves saying that they're typically cruising between 300 and 400 knots.
Yeah, that would make sense.
And what would that be in mile per hour?
Like well, Sean, you tell me. I don't know. It's like 1.1 knot to 1 mile per hour or vice versa. I don't remember. It's pretty close.
Yeah, it's not far off. So like, 320 knots would probably be about 360 miles per hour.
So Sean, let me ask you this, because this was something that Graves had said that I thought was interesting, and I have no context. But once that APG-79 came online, one of the things that they saw that I thought was interesting that Graves had mentioned, these objects would stay stationary in air for long periods of time, but the wind speed is like 140 mile per hour winds, but the object staying stationary. Is that something that a helicopter could do? Probably not.
I mean, I mean, staying stationary with a crosswind of 140 knots, that would be quite challenging.
Okay.
I'm not as familiar with helicopter, flight performance or capabilities, but that sounds tough.
But in your experience while you were in, did you know of any U.S. military plane that had that capability
of staying stationary in 140 knots?
Yeah, or just flying stationary and being able to go like
a Harrier can land vertically, but that's the only plane that I'm aware of, right?
Yeah, the Marine Corps has where they land on carriers. But Sean, you probably know this more than I, but they can't they can't stay hovered for a long period of time, I wouldn't think.
A Harrier?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, not for the amount of time that we're talking about, that Graves is talking about.
Okay. Do we have those type of capabilities in anything that we have in our military that you know?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I really don't.
I was hoping you did, because that was a big question I had.
Yeah, I mean, you have
you answered my question. We're done.
Yeah, I mean, you have the Osprey too, right? But even that's
true.
Right? Like
when they're not crashing.
100. Yeah, exactly. If you're really dealing with 140 knots of wind, like that's not insignificant.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious, and I didn't, again, not second guessing him, but is it really it was 140 knots?
He had said, I had wrote in my notes, and this is probably me more than anything, but I'd written down 140 miles per hour, not knots.
Just because when you think about, right, when you think about even like hurricane hunters flying into a hurricane, right, like you're rarely even then dealing with 140 knots of wind.
Like, I don't think I'd want to take off in a commercial. Actually, that's a good question. Maybe you know this, Sean. Is there a limit for how fast of a wind speed a plane can still take off, like for commercial airlines? Like, I feel like I would not want to fly in a plane where there was 140 mile per hour winds.
Yeah. So it all depends on which direction the wind's blowing, right? You have different planes at different ratings for how much wind they can take off in, like, and whether that's coming down the nose or whether it's a crosswind. And that's why often at airports, right, you'll have runways pointing in different directions.
Right. That makes sense. So what about your EP3? What would be the max wind speed you could safely take off in that plane?
I can't remember what our crosswind component was, but your crosswind component is significantly less than your headwind component, right? If you've got headwind that's coming, or like wind that's coming right down the runway and you're taking off into it, that can be a lot higher than a crosswind component. Crosswind component is much more dangerous than a headwind component.
So, Sean, this might be a dumb question, but I'm just curious. Is wind at ground level different than when you're in the air, right? So so if you have, say, a 30-mile-an-hour wind at ground, would it be that much more significant up in the air? And is it different at different altitudes?
No, it's a good one. I mean, yeah, you're basically, like, bottom line, your winds aloft can be totally different than your winds at ground level.
Okay.
And when you get aloft, you're also dealing with things like the jet stream, right? And so that will also come into play depending on where you're flying, obviously. But yeah, your winds aloft can be much, much, much different than your winds on the surface.
So 130, 140 knot winds could be plausible.
Yeah, they could be plausible. I wouldn't say the norm, but plausible. And if that's the case, right, like hopefully, you could fly into them, so you're not trying to fly against them or sideways to them.
I bet you'd make pretty good timing if it was at your tail, like it was pushing.
Yeah,
I bet you could make some great timing.
That's what I mean. Like, even flying commercial, right, going from the West Coast to the East Coast, sometimes you can get a nice tailwind and you can be hauling.
Sean, going back to Graves and the gimbal video and really going back to the systems on board the actual plane, we're talking about the actual, like, the video, so the FLIR portion. And I know, talking to both those pilots, there's a multitude of screens within the cockpit of both of these planes, the Super Hornet and F-18. And I guess I'm just wondering, because both Fravor and Graves noted that it's interesting that the situational awareness screen was not released in either one of the videos. And in Graves' video specifically, the gimbal video specifically, you hear the airman call out, "Look at the SAS, dude, there's a whole fleet of them." But like, that information has never been released. Do you find that odd, or what's kind of your take on that perception from the pilot's account of the story, that piece of information is left out?
That information has never been released.
Yes.
One of the things, about security clearances is one of the three things that go into a security clearance, right? Or with classified information, is the idea of need to know. Mm-hmm. And so, if the general public or people don't have the need to know, then that information is not going to get released. Mm-hmm. And I know that's not going to be a satisfying answer, but I think it's just a concept you kind of get, you get used to, and you just kind of, they're like, all right, well, hey, the powers that be have determined that information, that is classified. So, all right, I guess it's not going to get released.
So I guess that leads me into another question: is like to you, like how important is transparency in addressing public curiosity and like concern about these encounters, right? So you see, I mean, you listen to podcasts, you've got cloaked aliens in Las Vegas, you've got the Iraqi jellyfish, flying over a base in Iraq. You've got, the Graves Fravor.
Well, and don't forget Graves started founded the Americans for Safe Aerospace group just because it was like his take was, I don't care what these are. I just want to be safe when we're flying.
Right. I mean, so I guess my question is, how transparent do you feel that, the government should be with civilians regarding these?
I mean, so I want to go back to like Graves for a second, and the what is the name of the foundation or the group that he started?
The Americans for Safe Aerospace.
That's right. And yes, I completely agree. Right, if there is a real concern about general aviation safety from UAPs, then absolutely that there should be more, increased transparency and oversight. But it was interesting. I was reading again just recently about kind of with making it easier and creating kind of a centralized database to report UAP sightings. There are starting to be more kind of commercial pilots reporting some of these sightings, but I don't think any like commercial pilot so far has expressed any sort of real concern over like safety of flight issues. But again, is that to say that it's never happened? Who knows? But yeah, I mean, again, I think if it's an honest safety of flight issue and concern, sure, there should be increased transparency.
Do you think it's interesting with Graves that they actually put out a notice to airmen regarding the objects because they were just seeing them routinely within their operating area? Like that just seems so concerning to me. And obviously it was to Graves, which is why I did the congressional testimony, started this group. But like from your perspective, is that shocking? Or is that a common occurrence?
I do remember that. I did think that was interesting that a NOTAM had actually been issued. And I would want to read, I haven't read the actual NOTAM that was issued or what was contained in it, but I did find that interesting that they actually had issued a NOTAM about, numerous UAPs operating in a given area. Is that what it, like, have you guys seen the actual NOTAM that was issued?
No, I don't know if it's out there or not. The only thing that I've read verbatim is the actual congressional testimony from him, which did not include the verbiage from the notice to airmen.
Yeah.
So I align with you, Sean, on the transparency part. I believe that there are things that should be kept secret, but I also believe there's some things that should be transparent, and that comes to like if we know that there are UAPs or planes flying around areas that we don't know any information on, but they're there. That because you gotta, I believe that there would be commercial flights, there would be civilian Cessnas flying around. Like I believe like that information should be distributed to them, just for their own safety. I mean, would you agree to that?
Sure. Again, I mean, I'm all for like safety of flight consideration, but I think one thing with commercial airliners, right? Like they are flying like very well defined highways in the sky, right? You take off from Dulles and you're going to, London, right? So going across the Atlantic where, like there are very clearly defined jetways, and you are filing your flight plan and you are not deviating from that flight plan. And you are under radar control or, you're being closely tracked the entire time. Mm-hmm. So for commercial airliners, right, like there's very close scrutiny. For your Cessna pilot, you mentioned, even then, right? Like you are either flying on you're flying on a flight plan, right? So you're flying IFR, or you're flying VFR, right? Where you're not flying under a filed flight plan, but there are very strict rules still that apply. In order to fly VFR, like you have to be able to maintain, or has to be in what's called VMC, visual meteorological conditions. And it requires like, hey, you have to be able to, be able to see, basically so far. You basically have to say like, I can see and avoid any objects out there. So,
and Sean, you may or may not know this, but would air traffic controllers from John Glenn Airport be able to pick up UAPs?
Like, I mean, in theory, right? If again, like they're maintaining, kind of situational awareness. They are staring at a radar screen. So, I mean, if there's a craft out there that has advanced stealth technology that exceeds the capability of whatever radar that ATC facility is using, then no. But in theory, if there's something out there flying in controlled airspace, then someone employed by ATC should be able to see it.
So no big deal if you don't know this, but what do you think the procedure would be? So say an air traffic controller at a local airport catches an unidentified object flying through the airspace. They've tried to make contact with no avail. Like, what is the procedure? Do you know what the procedure is after that? Do they contact like the local Air National Guard? Do they?
Yeah. I mean, I would imagine they would alert all the other aircraft operating in the area, or aircraft that are operating in close proximity to that unidentified object. And yeah, then they would probably also flag it and raise it up the chain. I don't know exactly what the procedures are, but I would imagine it would be some combination of those two things, right? Safety of flight. Hey, immediately, are there any aircraft that are at risk? And then, also, hey, let's try and find out what this was, who it was, and if there's any punitive action that needs to be taken.
Sean, what's your take on Graves' description and his squadron's description of the craft that they encountered? The dark gray cube within a translucent sphere.
Yeah. I mean, one of my questions was, I remember with Fravor, him mentioning that, that he thought it was about 40 feet long, but I was trying to remember, is there any reference, did Graves make any reference to the size of the cube and the sphere?
Yeah, they did. And it was a real generic reference, because the only frame of reference they got when they were flying out in formation, the planes were 100 feet apart from one another. And that's when they went by this cube. And I don't have a note on it, but I want to say I remember him saying that they kind of guesstimated that it was about 15 feet.
Okay. The sphere surrounding the cube was about 15 feet.
The cube was touching the sphere in the corners.
Okay.
Okay. That makes sense.
So, I mean, 15 feet isn't that big.
No.
So, yeah. I mean, again, having not seen it, I mean, who knows?
Well, I guess the big question is right now, Sean, do you believe in UAPs? Do you believe in UFOs, aliens, that stuff? What is your take on all that?
So, again, I've never had an encounter or an experience myself, but I was actually talking about it with my kids before. When you think about the universe is infinite, right? Odds are there's other intelligent life out there. Are these things, UFOs and UAPs, are they alien craft? Who knows? Or are they, the next version of the SR-71, right? That was,
Right.
kept secret for a long time.
Right.
Right.
That is the ultimate question. And we'll probably never know the answer to it, but that is phenomenally interesting. Do you have any thoughts on the idea of us reverse engineering crashed craft?
I mean, if we are, that would make sense, right?
Yeah.
But whether or not we're actually doing that.
I mean, we did it. We did it in World War II. We did it in, Vietnam. Like we would capture, combatant aircraft, vehicles, whatever, and we would reverse engineer those just to see how they work, especially like Soviets, they had a sub or something. So I would believe that we are definitely reverse engineering something, whether or not it's alien technology or another government technology. Mm-hmm. I would say we're probably reverse engineering something.
So Sean, I guess your answer to the ultimate question is, are we alone? What do you say?
No, I don't think we are. Again, going back to the universe is infinite, right? And the number of planets, the number of stars out there. No, do I think there's other intelligent life in the universe? Yes. Mm-hmm. To the extent it's here, it's present and interacting with us here on Earth. Yeah, who knows?
Yeah, it's fair.
That is fair. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. I would call you a tweener, like you, Sean.
All right.
Because again, like I've told our listeners before, I think it would be really neat if there was alien life. However, I think it would be scary as shit if there was actual alien life, because you don't know, are they friend or foe? What are their intentions? You know what I mean? Like, so if they were to come to Earth and let's just say that these UAPs are extraterrestrial. They're jamming our radar. They're flying at speeds that our aircraft, that to our knowledge, can't fly. So their weapons, maybe their weapon systems and everything is more advanced than ours. So what are we to do at that point? You know what I mean? So that's the scary part of it.
If I'm the government in that scenario, I cover it up as best I can and try to stay in cahoots with whoever that is.
And then ruin anybody's life who tries to come forward.
Sorry, Bob. Appreciate your service. We're gonna audit you annually. And the FBI, give us our Element 115 back.
Yes, the FBI is going to raid your trinket shop every month for the
stop selling uranium, dude.
That's awesome. All right, Sean. Well, we truly appreciate you coming on the podcast today and discussing, some of our capabilities and your personal thoughts on Graves and Fravor. Is there anything you want, any save rounds before we finish up here?
No, I don't think so. Again, thanks for having me on. I'm sorry, I feel like I've given a bunch of non-answers. But just I think that's the other thing, going back to the resumes and credibility, right, of fellow aviators, right? Like, having not been in their shoes exactly and experienced what they experienced, I feel like I'm not really in a position to say one way or the other, but but also just a fan of the podcast. Just you guys, it's a great show.
Well, thank you.
We appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. And so all of our listeners out there, don't forget to download the episode. Give us some likes. We are now streaming on YouTube as well. Whoop, so whoop. You can now, obviously we don't have any live videos as of yet. We are currently,
we got faces for radio, not for video. I mean, let's just keep it real.
I'm a beautiful man.
Video killed the radio star.
I have a face for video. All right. We can just black you out. Put
that's fine. Give me the bag.
Yeah, there we go.
Yep.
But anywho, so we are considering doing some live, not live podcasts, but video podcasts so that we can upload them on YouTube, and then everybody can see where we record at, which is I mean, I think it's pretty pimp, but
Pretty sweet man cave.
it is a man cave, but
Yeah.
it is a garage. And, but with that, like I say, don't forget to share with your friends.
Keep listening. Send us your questions.
Yeah, if you have any questions for Sean, send them. When you click on the bio of the podcast, there's a little link you can click. Send us your questions, and if we have questions, we'll get back with Sean and ask him, and then we'll let you know what it says.
I like it. Until next week, keep your mind open and your eyes on the sky. You never know what's going to fly by.
And with that, we'll catch you on the next one.